Welcome to another episode of Go-To-Market Mavericks, the podcast about go-to-market innovators, risk takers, and leaders, and the unique strategies, tactics, and playbooks they use to succeed. Today, I'm joined by James Kaikis, the Chief Revenue and Experience Officer at TestBox, a proof of value company that specializes in utilizing synthetic data to power live demos and proof of concepts. Prior to TestBox, James founded and sold Pre-Sales Collective, a global professional development company for solutions engineering execs and professionals. Prior to that, he was a solutions engineer leader at Salesforce, Showpad, and Revenate. James, super excited to have you on today.
Thanks, Mattson. Appreciate the time. Thanks for the Game of Thrones intro. I always appreciate the background.
So on that note, let's dive even deeper into who is James. Would love to understand, if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit about your genesis story, as they say.
Sure.
How'd you get where you're at? And it's always fun doing this because there's not a single path to kind of this revenue career. So yeah.
No, there definitely isn't. And I would say, I know everyone thinks they got a unique story. I might definitely be there for sure. So actually, I started my career in athletic and sports operations. I used to work in recreation management, sport management. I used to run events. That's literally where my impetus started. And I took that operation background and went to hospitality and ran a hotel. I was a hotel manager. And when you're in hotel manager, it's all about making things move and making things work at all times and really crisis management. And decided that being in the operations and the crazy schedules just wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to get into tech. So what did I do? I took my expertise from hospitality and went to a hospitality technology company where I was one of the only people who came from hotels. And so I used my subject matter expertise to become, a really important key member of our growth over the, 2 years that I was there. And actually that's where, they would call me on, I was in professional services, and they would call me on sales calls because I worked with hotels, and they'd say, "Hey, James, we need you to talk to this hotel leader or this hotel group." And we were talking to 5-diamond hotel groups, in Europe, in the Middle East. And so I could speak the language, right? I was a subject matter expert. And I was like, this sales thing is pretty fun. And so I moved over I helped start the solutions engineering team, became the first solutions engineering leader at a company called Showpad. Over 4 years, watched our growth from 7 million to 75 million. Went to Salesforce because everyone needs big enterprise experience. And that's where I actually started my own company, Pre-Sales Collective. And we grew it from an idea to a 35,000 member global community, global professional development business, sold that business, took 18 months off and, took 6 months off and decided what was next. And I wanted to go back into tech. And what would be a better place to go is the demo automation space. That's where TestBox currently plays. Because at Pre-Sales Collective, all of my partners were demo automation companies. I watched this space be born. So, I'm one of the experts in the space. And when I learned what TestBox was doing and how they pivoted from a marketplace, I was like, that's the answer. And I want to go work at that company. So I consulted with them for a few months, got to learn about who they were, how they were solving the problem, joined full-time about 15 months ago. And we've pivoted the entire business in that time.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I chuckled when you mentioned hospitality. There was a time when I was in high school when I thought I was going to go run a hotel because I think I just loved hotels back in high school. I just loved the concept of vacation, and I did. In fact, I even did like a Distributive Educational Clubs of America, DECA. I did DECA.
Nice.
Went to state, passed my test.
Wow.
So anyway,
Amazing.
we started out in the same place. Took very different routes though. But what I was going to say, it seems like a common thread for you is this concept of taking subject matter expertise and then identifying people solving interesting problems against that, your subject matter expertise, whether it's hospitality, whether it's what you're now doing with TestBox. Curious, if you think there's anything there in terms of just career for those maybe even young or older audiences on this call, just thoughts on how maybe that has benefited you or insights there, my career progression.
Yeah. I think being in hospitality taught me everything about customer experience, right? So just a precursor to today's episode. I've always been a risk taker, and I've always tried to use transferable skills. And if I look at every one of my jobs, I took transferable skills to get me where I am today. And when people reach out to me, especially career changers or someone looking to make a role, you have to be an expert in something,
Mhm.
right? You're likely an expert or something, at least know more than most people in something. And so even for, let's use a solutions profession, I have plenty of people in my network who reached out to me and say, James, I want to run go-to-market like you are. Or, hey, I want to make the transition over to an account executive or VP of sales. And I tell them, like, you've got a specialty. You know what has made you do well in your current job today. Figure out where the gap is to make that leap and go work on that, right? And I think for me, going from a solutions background to an entrepreneur prepared me, because as a solutions engineer, I got exposure to so many facets of a technology company, so that when I ran my own business, I was like, oh yeah, I know how some of these functions work. And then now that I'm in a tech company, it's like taking that experience and trying to elevate it. So I always like to tell people, lean into your strengths. It's an important part of the career journey.
Yeah, totally. No, I love that. It is definitely sage advice, and I love that you kind of made a point to lean into your very specific subject expertise of throughout your career. Um, so pivoting a little bit, prior to this conversation, James, you and I, we chatted a little bit. I did look some of your LinkedIn posts, and one of the concepts that I found quite interesting was, I think that today, setting the context a bit, today we all know that GRR, your gross revenue retention, as well as your your other retention metrics it's really critical in driving growth. Um, and part of that is having a land and expand strategy, right?
Yeah,
Some businesses are more amenable to that, and it's more natural, where like there's a real natural
totally.
expansion path. Sometimes you have to like claw and fight to get that. You're chuckling, so I know that you understand what I'm saying. Um,
Yeah,
but one of the points you made in one of your posts was about the concept of just being really deliberate and
yeah,
intentional about
yeah,
where you're going to go next, even before you get that,
mhm,
the ink dries on that first deal.
yeah.
Um, Kind of caught, it caught my attention. Would love you to like just dig a little bit into like the approach you guys are taking there at TestBox, and maybe
Yeah.
even how you've
Yeah.
seen this applied elsewhere, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And thanks for following my LinkedIn. I've been putting some energy into the posts that I think are, happening. And I like to call this, we're kind of building the new go-to-market playbook. I think that there's a lot of different things happening right now, convergence of trends. And SaaS is harder than ever, right? Selling is harder than ever. And for the first time, I think companies are really taking a step back and saying, okay, what we did previously in the past decade, decade and a half, right, might not be working. We need to figure out something new. And I'm one of these people. I grew up in this golden age of SaaS, hyper growth at all costs. And now you're starting to see some shifts in that, right? And there are even some venture capitalists out there talking about their portfolio companies for the first time getting more revenue from their existing base than net new logos, right? Net new logos are hard right now. And if you think about and you look at the trends, you can still big game hunts, as they call it, right? Get really big land deals, but they're harder than ever, right? Buying committees are larger. People can do their own homework. So there's all these things happening. And so for what we've been doing at TestBox is taking a very intentional approach. I've got a general thesis that we forgot who matters in software, and it's the customer, right? We growth at all costs. We might say the customer matters, but are we building an experience that delivers value for them so that they renew, they expand, and they don't churn? And so what we have done at TestBox is taking a very deliberate approach to what is our ICP, what companies can we deliver the most value in, and what companies would be great to bring into our portfolio where we can work on a multi, year strategy and a multi tenant expansion. So one example, right? Intuit is TestBox's largest customer. Intuit is a very well-known company out there. And as a seed stage company, going and securing Intuit was a huge, huge win.
Massive, massive.
And a massive win. And as you can expect, right? that is a big company, multiple products, worldwide distributed teams. How would we go in and chunk off a big deal? Well, the reality is we are never going to get a huge deal from day one. Now, might I add, this is a pretty significant deal. TestBox sells to mid-market enterprise. We're talking six figures plus, right, for land deals. What would be, if we can't get $1 million on a land deal, what does a path to that look like? And so we found a team, and I'm happy to dig into more details, built consensus within a specific organization, identified what other organizations in that business had a need and desire to utilize TestBox. And we went with, let's get this first department win, and let's figure out how we expand immediately thereafter. So we actually closed a pretty large land deal, and we had an expansion that was double the size of our land within 6 weeks. And we have actually had 6 expansions in the first year of that contract and are working on a 7th and 8th right now. And the reason being is that we had intention of how are we going to approach this customer? How are we going to deliver value? How do we get through the first hurdle, prove our value, and expand and continue to prove value? And now we're working on, a global expansion across into it.
Yeah, I think you peanut buttered across some of the factors, but would love for you to maybe dig into maybe 2 or 3 of the key factors that you think. So, well, I guess 2 or 3 key factors that would make this possible for you guys today.
Yeah. So the first one is we have a pretty defensible product, right? We're selling to mid-market enterprises that typically spend, at least one headcount, sometimes millions of dollars of headcounts. It's really, look, software is meant for a company to buy it and utilize it. It's not meant for a company to demonstrate it and always give you a proof of concept of what your life could look like. And that is a massive struggle with companies. And so for us, we've got this ability to be able to let them sell in a way that they've never been able to sell before. We've allowed them to find buyers the opportunity to experience product in a way they haven't done before, which builds trust, right? Yep. Secondly, there's typically, as we said, we're talking about sales being hard, very strategic initiatives within our organization on where they need to go. Let's use partners, for example. Partner use cases are very popular within our customer base. Organizations are trying to enable their channel, they're trying to enable their integration partners, and they need them to be extensions of their business. And so where have we identified to say, hey, this partner use case is something that we can really latch onto and tie to? How do we help these folks out? Now, one of the things that makes this really successful, Mattson, is that one, we identify the organizations that have a great opportunity for expansion, but 2, our account executives are full life cycle. They own the account in perpetuity. So there is no, let's sit here and make sure the land is as big as humanly possible and push this deal out so that I can get my commission before it gets handed off to somebody else. No, the account executives and the solution architects own that account in perpetuity. So they're incentivized to land that deal and incentivized to expand that deal because they're paid the same level of commission on expansion as they are net new business, which has allowed most of our customers to expand or renew up across our install base.
Interesting. What is the counter argument to running it sounds great, right? Having a full cycle AE.
Yeah.
You have incentives are pretty much right? Like aligned with yourself as an AE to drive value across the entirety of the expansion path. Is there a reason to not have that consolidated role? Yeah. Well, what's the counter case to your?
There are definitely cases, right? Mm-hmm. If your ACVs are not big enough, right, it's too expensive of a model to be able to support.
Yep.
If you're typical, selling into one persona and you're not necessarily expanding on those accounts, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Like there's plenty of companies that are selling 5, 10K, 15K ASP products, and there's not a lot of expansion. So you can't support that. That being said, it's also hard. This is a very hard motion to run. And when you have account executives that have net new business and then they have expansion business, it's a hard thing to juggle.
Yeah.
But the reality is if you do it right and you figure out how to balance strategic account, named accounts with your current customer, you're not overloading your team. Mm-hmm. And so it does depend on the motion. It does depend on the ACV, and it does depend on the TAM. If you're like a high transactional business, this model likely doesn't work for you.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, really interesting stuff there. So you've got your you're running a full cycle with your AEs. They're incented to drive, this this expansion motion. Um, Tell me about maybe some of the. Is this stuff that you get into contract? Like, how do you kind of
Yeah.
how do you tee this up with the customer, right? Because
Yeah.
of course, you want to expand. It's your company, right? Like, you'd love to
Yeah.
solve more problems for your customers where
Right.
they're willing to pay you for it, right? But such is not always the case in terms of appetite on the other side. So how do you set things up?
Totally true. Totally true. A couple of things. So one of the things that we are always doing is we are negotiating a per user price. We're negotiating per user volume pricing on the per user, and also what additional integrations or data sets or templates look like up front. So we have that built in the contract so that there's no friction point, right? Let me give an example of Gong, right? Gong is a big customer of TestBox. Everyone is pretty familiar with Gong, utilizes Salesforce, right? And Gmail, but they also have Dynamics. They have 365. There's Tableau, right? There's so many other systems that Gong is getting ingrained with that when we landed Gong, it was just Gong and Salesforce and has started to expand. So if you know where the company is going and you know what their growth story is, you can kind of build that in with intention from the beginning. Another part of this, right, is that, okay, let's say, for example, it's outreach. Okay, outreach is another TestBox customer. Well, if we wanted to go to a different part of their business, some of those leaders might have different objectives and might have different initiatives. And if we know that is going to elongate the initial land deal and the initial sales cycle, we will say, hey, look, we know this is a priority. Let's get this initial deal done. Let's get them integrated into Salesforce. Let's build these certain use cases out. And then as soon as that deal signs and closed, we get through all the contracts, we go right to those other teams and start working on that sales process. Because if the incentives are misaligned, the account executive might say, well, hey, there's a CS opportunity right there, right? I'm going to hold this out a little bit longer to try to get this deal bigger. But we all know time kills all deals,
Yep.
right? So that's just a little bit of a strategy on what we work to. And I'll even tell you, when I buy software, Mattson, I tell people like, hey, I want to know what the per user prices are for us to expand. I just bought software today for my go-to-market team. And I was like, I need to know exactly what these things look like. And we don't typically do this. And I'm like, well, I need to know what they are so I could build some predictability into my business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that predictability is huge today for leaders. So great points there. Something you skimmed across near the beginning as you kind of dove into this approach you guys take was the concept of identifying the right accounts, right? You've listed a few of your lighthouse customers here. I'm wondering, how does I guess this intentionality to expand
Right.
influence, because that's very strategic, right? You have to understand the
Yes.
business quite well in order to kind of
Yeah.
be there by the time you sign that first deal. So I'm curious, how does that inform kind of your outbound or your possibly
Yes.
inbound, but like your prospecting efforts
Yeah.
and research?
So I will tell you that the concept of lookalike customers is really important to our business, right? Where Gong was one of our first in that revenue intelligence space, it allowed us to understand how we solve that problem. And we've actually since got Outreach, Apollo, People AI, and a couple of other ones in that space because we know exactly how to solve that problem. And we as a business have found more and more efficiency in selling lookalike companies. And so for us, what we've actually done from take a step back is we've taken our install base and we've looked at all the strategic accounts that look very similar, right? So if Zendesk is a customer, what are all the companies that look like Zendesk, right? If Gone is a customer, what are the companies that look like? If mParticle is a customer, what are the companies that look like mParticle, right? So that allows us to get some expertise to be able to be more dangerous in those sales calls. And so then we move to like a named account model and a strategic account, lighthouse account model. We have a couple different tiers there. And when we have those conversations, let's just be honest, and Gong has called us on this, is like when you go to outreach and say, hey, we're solving this for Gong, you get their attention,
Mhm.
right? And there's a couple of other spaces that have actually gone hyper competitive. And now TestBox is actually a competitive differentiator that if you don't have TestBox in one of these spaces, you're at a disadvantage.
Mhm.
And so we have actually played that very well. Now, one of the things that is very interesting for our business right now, because we've pivoted in the last, to demo automation 14, 15 months ago, we don't want to focus too much on a couple of the same customers, right? Because we might be not necessarily looking at what else is out there. So for example, we've had quite a few healthcare companies or FinServe companies come our way, and we don't have any similar customers, but we've explored the use cases and said, wow, like we can actually really solve this use case. And once you open up that door, right? You open up that door, you can try to go after, similar companies as well. So again, this is our strategy. And so we have a mix of, named accounts, strategic accounts, lighthouse accounts, and we get quite a bit of inbound. And the inbound, we've spent the last year really redefining who we are so that our inbound is actually more qualified than it was previously.
Huge.
And we've been able to find some new use cases and new customers. So we have this very deliberate focus, but we also keep our eyes and options open to understand what other problems we could solve. And it has worked well. And again, when you're kind of building a company from the ground up, you can have this intentionality and you can have a lot of efficiency in this type of model.
Yeah, love that. I mean, so you've kind of talked for the last little bit about how you are uh, identifying lookalike companies, which gives
Yeah.
you automatic efficiency gains as you are and effectiveness gains as you executing your sales strategy. Curious what you're doing on the front of, building your POV.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, as I'm thinking about it, your POV is building your POV within a cluster of customers is probably
Yeah.
easier and easier as take them
It
down,
is.
and you can then begin
It
to say,
is.
hey, here's some basic boilerplate that like is shared, like basic problems
Yeah.
fundamental problems that all of these customers have. We just know,
Yeah.
and then each
Yeah.
time you're adding to that. Yeah, that's just kind of how I'm thinking about it. But like, I'd love to hear your perspective on how you kind of. I think you mentioned groundswell is something you guys are exploring or doing.
Yeah.
Would love to hear a little
Yeah.
bit more about that.
Well, I would say like we have learned these, learn these spaces, and we do respect all of our customers' privacy, right? We take that very seriously when you're in these types of conversations. But for us, I have always had a little bit of internal conflict of like, let's get to the senior leader and have a really good message that hits the senior leader's inbox. I think we all know like getting to that inbox is hard. And if you send a message that misses the mark, and a lot of times most people miss the mark, you're behind the eight ball, right? You got so much more work to do. And so what we like to do, and I know this is a age old approach, is we like to talk to the people in the field. I've got, because my pre-sales collective experience, a lot of friends in executive roles, and we'll build relationships and learn what they're doing, but we go to the field. We go and talk to the AEs, we talk to the solutions engineers, we talk to the customer success people, and we say, what is life like in the field? And we get all that information. And so when it's a public company, I had one of these calls today. We went and looked up all the information on a public company that we could. We talked to about half a dozen people on the front line, so that when I had that meeting with that executive, they were like, wow, you guys did your homework, right? You know our business. And yes, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of intention, but if you get it right, it accelerates the sales process at the end of the day.
Got it. And to your point around it takes a lot of work. I think that there are some things right now that automation and AI workflows
Yeah.
can't necessarily address yet. But I am curious because it is a lot of work, like you said, to get
Yes.
out there and like boots on the ground, knocking
Yeah.
on doors, figuratively
Yeah.
speaking, right, door to door, trying to get
Yeah.
this information to build this POV. Research seems to be an area, as I
Yes.
talked to other go-to-market leaders, where AI is because these results don't necessarily have to be exact and precise, and you're not dealing with
Yeah.
like human engagement. It seems like an area that
Right.
might be ripe for just AI to really contribute in a positive way. But I'm curious if you've tried anything. If you're, what's your
No.
take on that
Yeah.
as an alternative to maybe this
Yeah.
this age-old approach?
Yeah. It's a great question and very timely for nowadays, right? So for one, we are using AI to do account research. Like there's so much information out there. And if I think about all the time I had to spend reading 10Ks and getting information, like, wow, I've just saved so much time, right? So we actually will use lots of different products and models to cross information to be able to come up with a strong point of view that's based off the information that's out there. We've worked with some other systems and built some of our own systems around intent, right? To understand, is somebody cold? Are they warm? Are they a real hot? Active evaluation. I think that's what's super interesting as well. I think that there's a couple of interesting tech out there right now. I think what I'm trying to figure out is, how do you utilize AI without coming off as the robot, right? I think that, like, I think this is tending to be a little bit of a hot topic right now. Is that, like, some of the words that the AI is using, you could just tell it's AI,
Oh yeah.
and that comes off as inauthentic. And so, how do you lean on authenticity in this era where there's a lot of noise? Things are coming off as inauthentic, and it's just a massive volume game. And so, for us, it's just kind of figuring out how we thread that needle at the end of the day. And I will lastly say is that I've also got this general thesis that um, every interaction matters significantly more than it ever did in the past. Like the willingness to give people a chance and to break through the noise. Like, we're talking about Olympic margins here, right? Winning and losing is at an Olympic margin percentage right now. And I don't know that everyone is taking it as seriously as it is, right? Because if you just slip up a tiny bit, you can have the best product, but you deliver a poor experience, poor message, don't follow up, don't put the customer at the front, you will lose that deal. And the percentage of people who now buy based off experience continues to increase to an astronomical rate. Like Salesforce put out a report, I believe 2 years ago, it was 85% of people buy based off the experience. So we're talking about Olympic margins now when it comes to product. And as there's so much saturation, all these things are kind of playing into, again, the convergence of trends.
No, it totally resonates. Even at Common Room, when you kind of do these win analyses afterwards, like, why did we win this deal? You talk to the customer. Yes, like, there's the product win, there's the technical win, there's all these different wins, but I think overall, right, there's the team. Like, the team tends to be this thing now that's even super important, because people they don't have time to figure things out on their own. They want an expert on their side, in their domain, in their space. To your point about creating these clusters, like, it gets easier as you have that expertise. So that totally resonates with me as well, that it is about the totality of your experience. And if you're running in the Olympics, like, marathons are still often decided by just inches, right? So
It's
even though
crazy.
you may feel like startups they're long, they're sometimes a slog,
Yep.
right? Like, but like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, everything still matters, right? So
It does.
that's a great thought there. So before we close, we're almost at our half-hour mark here. I have a few. Well, I want to give you a chance to share any perspectives on, I guess, suggestions for leaders out there for revenue organizations. My
Sure.
first question would be, if there some secret that you think you've unearthed. And secrets are known by one to many people, right? But, like, let's be clear what I mean by
Yeah.
secret. But, like, is there
Yeah.
some secret that you
Yeah.
kind of maybe come across in your career that you think would be valuable for other leaders of
Yeah.
sales, revenue
Yeah.
organizations out there?
Yeah. Let me start by saying that I think customer success is a company-wide initiative, not a department, right? And the reason I say that is that, I started this call by saying I worked in hospitality, and I learned everything about customer experience and how you handle customers in that type of environment. And when you're a software company and you do not really care about your customers, it will bite you down the road. And if you build a model that puts the customer at the forefront, the customer's organization at the forefront, and delivers value across the journey, the other things come in. I know there'll be some revenue leaders who are like, no, it's all about the revenue. You just got to focus on the revenue. But if you're focusing on revenue and not focused on the customer, I hate to use the leaky bucket, but you might have the leaky bucket, right? Not all revenue is good revenue. And that is a hard thing for a lot of people to swallow. So when you focus on the customer and do right by the customer and the customer experience, the revenue, the GRR, the expansion, those things come, right? Yep. They come.
Yeah, I love that. Revenue is an outcome metric, and the experience is the input to that outcome, right?
So that's a great call.
Yeah. And then I think you may have already shared a hill you're willing to die on, so you can double down on that hill, or you can share, like, maybe you've got just like a massive valley of hills that you're just ready to die on. I hope so, because I'm gonna ask you again, like, is there a hill you're willing to die on with respect to go-to-market strategy or execution?
Yeah. Ooh, I've got a couple, and I think just judging by my last question, I'll take a little bit different approach. I think that everyone within a company should be on a quota. I think everyone should be on a quota and a quota metric. I do not believe in 100% base salary organizations. And I've had so many people tell me, well, James, like, I'm going to do what's right by the customer. It's in my DNA, it's the culture. The reality is that's a fallacy. You could have the best culture in the world, but as you grow and scale, incentives drive behaviors, right? And if you are not focused on giving people the ability to overperform, you will have an organization of average and subpar and above average employees. You have to build a culture of excellence, and it's done by putting people on performance-based quotas.
Love that. That's an entire episode we could unbox later on. Yeah.
I'll be honest,
yeah.
I'll give you one thing, right? I come from the solutions engineering world, right? Where most companies are not on quotas. I fought for most of my career to never be on a quota because it was the team. And then I realized what happens when people are not on quota. And there's not a performance metric that everyone rallies around. And it can be very detrimental to an organization. And so I hear customer success teams that are 100% base salaries. Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And I think as tech is shifting, if I can leave one thing with, like, the new go-to-market playbook, which I've been doing interview series on and newsletter talking about this, right? There's going to be a change that happens in the next couple of years on how we think about headcount and resource planning. And if you think that 100% base salaries across your entire business are going to get you there, it's not. And so everything is going to be incentive-based. As you see, a lot of these companies have got a lot of money in them. They've got crazy valuations and no path to an IPO, right, or an exit. They've got to figure some things out, and putting everyone on a performance quota across the business is likely the only way you can get to some sort of outcome. So maybe that's a hot take, and I'll get some people to debate that with me. But I firmly believe that, and I firmly believe that's going to be more and more the trend over the next couple of years.
Yeah, drop it in the comments when we push this out on LinkedIn. So, James, it's been a pleasure. Loved chopping it up with you today. And we'll catch you next time, and hopefully have you on again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Okay.